Chris, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Travis.
The first thing I see here, today you released your Thursday 10, and the topic for this week's Thursday 10, recruiting what-ifs that shaped the 2017 college football season. And let's start right there at the top of the list with Baker Mayfield. Sort of a gypsies-like existence, I guess you could say, throughout his college football career. And it wasn't just limited to sort of the path he took, right? I mean, there were options for him prior to walking on at Texas Tech. If he had taken those routes, could have changed the face of college football this season, I guess.
Yeah, I think the story with Baker gets a little lost sometimes. He actually had, I believe, 4 FBS offers, the biggest of which being Washington State with Mike Leach as the head coach. And he ended up in an air raid system anyway in Lubbock. But I think if he would have gone out there, he would have killed it. But I think the more interesting thing is TCU. TCU kind of worked with Baker throughout the process. Baker always thought he was going to get an offer. But Gary Patterson, for whatever reason, did not end up offering. Actually, Gary later called Baker arrogant as the reason he didn't offer. But had Baker gone there, it might have totally changed the complexion of the last couple of years of the Big 12. I would imagine TCU would have been competing for playoff spots. Baker might have won a Heisman at TCU. And Oklahoma probably doesn't win 3 straight Big 12 championships, so it would have been really interesting.
Another one that is very interesting thinking about now, especially after the way the 2017 season ended, was eventual Georgia linebacker Roquan Smith, who at one time looked as if he was headed west, right?
Yeah, I don't know if people remember, but that was one of the odder things I've ever seen. I remember Roquan sitting at a table with his entire family, and he held up UCLA gloves in the middle of Georgia, so he's going to head out west. And then like 30 minutes later, it comes out that UCLA's defensive coordinator is going to leave for the Atlanta Falcons role. And Roquan finds out, doesn't sign his papers. Like a week goes by, and you don't hear much from his camp. And eventually he ends up signing with Georgia. And then Roquan not been on Georgia this year. I don't think that Georgia team is in the college football playoffs and wins the SEC. He was that important and that good all season. It would have been really interesting to see him out west instead.
Yeah, a true alpha dog in the middle of that Bulldogs defense and Roquan Smith. Here's one I'd have had a tough time envisioning and would today. Quan Berkeley at Rutgers, the former Penn State running back.
Yeah, actually it's funny. I think 2 running backs on the list are there for Rutgers. Jonathan Taylor, Wisconsin star freshman, was also a Rutgers commit. But Rutgers, you have to give credit to their scouting department. They were one of the first people on Saquon. They were one of the first people on Jonathan. Saquon's a unique case because he really didn't do any camps until about the summer after his junior year. He ended up going to the opening and blew up there, and at that point he had offers from whoever he wanted. But early on, like, he didn't really have much. He always kind of wanted to play at Rutgers growing up in New York originally before moving to Pennsylvania, and he kind of thought that was where he would end up. He didn't have much belief in himself early on in his career. He was just a pretty okay running back as a sophomore with a lot of traits, and committed to Rutgers, but eventually when James Franklin came on, they gave him the hard sell, and he flipped. But can you imagine Rutgers with Saquon Barkley, or can you imagine Penn State without Saquon Barkley the last 3 years? I don't think that program's anywhere close to where it is.
I'm getting more and more to where I can't imagine Wisconsin without a running back from the state of New Jersey. It seems like they've done a lot of good work in the Garden State. Ron Dane, I believe, went from Jersey to Wisconsin to win a Heisman years ago. So it's been a pretty nice pipeline, sort of unexpected pipeline for the Badgers from the East Coast. Now, a couple of quarterbacks up next that have very much impacted how things have worked, not only in the Southeastern Conference here in the last year, but within this very state. Jared Stidham, who at one time looked to be headed to Lubbock, and sort of, I guess, intertwined maybe with Baker Mayfield from that standpoint. Pat Mahomes, now the Kansas City Chiefs. And we'll talk about Jake Fromm next, but the route that Stidham kind of took, I guess in some ways is similar to Mayfield, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Jared, I grew up, I worked out in West Texas at the time. Jared was kind of lighting it up out there, and I remember seeing him on Friday night. He was always a Texas Tech guy. He kind of grew up rooting for them out in that part of the state. He and Cliff were really tight. And it was a pretty big surprise when Jared ultimately dropped his commitment from Texas Tech and went to Baylor. But I think a lot of people forget that Art Briles, who obviously his name is associated with something completely different now, was the head coach at Jared Stidham's high school. Art Briles won 4 state championships out there. And at Baylor, he had a lot of pull in that community still. So Jared had people in that community kind of tugging him to Baylor. And ultimately he flipped there. And obviously he played for a year before getting hurt. And then the entire Baylor scandal happened and Jared left. But had Jared stayed at Texas Tech, he would have probably sat behind Pat Mahomes for a year or two. And he would have kind of taken over that role this year. And the Auburn situation this year would have never happened if Jared ended up going to Texas Tech. But Patrick Mahomes blew up as a freshman, and Jared ended up kind of saving Auburn's quarterback room this season.
And, of course, Jake Fromm, another guy on your Thursday 10. One time committed to Alabama for a long time. He had the coaching change there at Georgia with Kirby Smart going in and Mark Richt going out. Man, you talk about a move that obviously benefited Georgia, but without Fromm maybe flipping to the Dogs, Alabama doesn't end up with Tua Tagovailoa.
It's kind of interesting. I think both fan bases at this point are probably pretty okay with the decision, right? Without Tua, I don't think Alabama wins the national championship, and I guess without Jake, I don't think Georgia's getting to the national championship in the first place. But yeah, Jake was a long-time Alabama commit. When Kirby left, Kirby offered, and he ultimately flipped. Jake grew up a big Georgia fan, and Mark Richt had never offered, which would probably go down in infamy for quite a while had Jake ended up at Alabama and done good things. But yeah, and the domino effect of that is huge. Maybe Tua ends up at Oregon and follows in Marcus Mariota's footsteps. Maybe Blake Barnett ends up staying at Alabama. Maybe I don't know. There's a lot of maybes associated with this one. Maybe Oklahoma's a national champion. You never know. But Jake ended up at Georgia, and that's how it happened.
The quarterback dominoes have become basically infinite, endless. When you talk about even going back into the recruiting process with these guys. Something else you published here recently on 247sports.com that I wanted to talk with you about, Chris. After 2 years, a look at how the class of 2016 is faring so far. 5-star guys in relation to Alabama. Jonah Williams was ranked the number 17 overall prospect in the 247 Sports composite rankings for the 2016 class. He was a 5-star. By every indication, I guess he has lived up to that designation.
Yeah, Jonah, he's been a foundation piece for Alabama the last few years. He was great at right tackle last year, played really well at left tackle this year. I expect him to be a high-round draft choice coming up in the next cycle of the draft process in 2019. And I think he's everything an Alabama fan could have asked for. He's been an anchor for that offensive line, and he's a pleasure to watch, and actually he's a smart kid and fun to talk to, too. So enjoyed watching him the last couple of years.
I guess in terms of the budding star sort of designation category, Mack Wilson, the linebacker from that class, number 16 overall in the composite, the 247 Sports composite rankings in 2016. Based on what we saw the last couple of games of the season, it looks like Mack's very much on his way to living up to his billing, too.
Man, Mack's fun to watch, isn't he? He just flies the ball. He's super aggressive. He looks like a babyface assassin with those braces he's got rocking. And he takes people's heads off up the middle. He's a really instinctive middle linebacker. And I guess with Sean Dion coming out, same kid from his high school kind of stepping in, you saw Mack kind of take the responsibility of those mic calls. And he performed really well on the biggest stage this year. And I have little to no doubt he'll step in there next year and kind of fill a big hole at middle linebacker with Rashawn and Sean Dion leaving. I expect Mack to be the leader of that linebacker core and kind of not miss a beat doing it.
Yeah, you think about pairing Mack Wilson with a healthy Dylan Moses in 2018 there at those middle and weak side positions, and I think that helps you get past trying to replace such key contributors and players in Rashaan Evans and Sean Dion Hamilton. Now, in your something to prove category, another Alabama player shows up there, Ben Davis, a former five-star recruit, ranked number 10 overall in the composite rankings for 2016. Watching Ben here in the last year or two, it's taken him a little bit longer than guys like Mack Wilson and some of the other C.J. Mosley before him. But from a physical attributes and skill set and all those things, this is a guy that you have to think in 2018 starts to make some kind of move in that rotation at Alabama.
Yeah, you would think so. From a physical standpoint, he's a freak. I mean, 6'4", 237, runs like a receiver. Is pretty aggressive in the middle and is a pretty instinctive player. I would imagine, and from what I've heard, I'm sure you've heard as well, that Nick Saban's system isn't the easiest to pick up, and sometimes it takes some time. And I would expect Ben Davis, with all his physical tools, to eventually kind of at least contribute. It's hard to imagine him not doing so. He's such a talented athlete. And, and he could be one of... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and as you're sort of alluding to here, it's a big part of it, and it goes back to the competition too, Chris. At really every position on the field at a place like Alabama, and you have to be able to do it on a daily basis, because if you don't, there's Mack Wilson there to do it, right? There's Dylan Moses there to do it, and that's kind of the light that you get the feeling you're still waiting to go on for Ben Davis, and maybe it'll be as soon as this spring. Now, some top 100 guys that you have listed, among them Raekwon Davis, checked in at number 83 overall in the class of 2016, and I'd say to this point, Alabama has gotten good value out of a player sort of in that area of the rankings.
Yeah, I remember the first time I met Raekwon Davis was at the Army Bowl, and I have never been more physically intimidated by a recruit in my life. He was like towering over me, and he had a mean look on his face after practice, and he was standing right next to Kendall Jones, and I was like, they are the same size, but not the same human. And Raekwon has turned out to be quite the player. He dominated for stretches in the national title game, and I think he's a future first-round pick potentially. I don't think there's anything but a bright future ahead for that guy. He can really play, and he's flexible too. He's played multiple positions in the line. Perfect player for that Nick Saban defense.
And just hard to imagine a guy being 6'7" and move as well as he does. I was convinced, Chris, his first year or two on campus, someone in his family had made a mistake, because anyone that wasn't pushing him to play left tackle at that size on offense was not thinking in terms of financial gain down the road. But he has proven to be more than capable at the defensive line position, even at a size that you typically don't see those guys around Alabama or anywhere else for that matter. Now, some big contributors you've got listed that were outside the top 100 for the composite rankings in 2016. And right there at the top of your list, Jalen Hurts, the quarterback for the Alabama Crimson Tide the last two seasons. Jalen was the 192nd ranked overall prospect for the class of 2016, 26-2 as a starter. All that being said, all the good things we've seen, maybe on this list of guys that you have here with Jalen, his situation might be more up in the air than any of them. And given his credentials, that's almost hard to believe, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of nuts that a guy could be 26-2 in his career as a starter and not have a secure job going into the spring. But I think you would almost put Jalen as kind of the underdog in the situation going into the competition with Tua. And I guess there are some limitations with Jalen that you go to the quarterback, and that is kind of part of the issue. But it's hard to fault him for anything he's done in his career at Alabama. He's done nothing but win. He's taken care of the ball. He's distributed it pretty well, and he's been essentially a second running back in the backfield every down. And he's exceeded almost every expectation you can take out of the 192nd overall player in the country. I guess it's just a matter of hanging on to your job, and like you said at Alabama, it's never easy to do so. So the Tua Jalen battle is going to be a lot of fun this spring, I get the feeling.